Commander Sarah Chen stood at the reinforced viewport of the transport vessel, watching as Kepler 438b grew larger in the darkness ahead. The planet looked exactly as the reports described it, a gray, lifeless rock spinning slowly in the void. No atmosphere worth breathing, no water, no vegetation. Just dust, stone, and the kind of desolation that made even hardened space veterans uncomfortable. "Final approach in 30 minutes, Commander," announced Captain Torres from behind her. His voice carried that careful neutrality that everyone had adopted since the court-martial. Nobody wanted to be seen as too friendly with someone the Galactic Council had branded a war criminal. Sarah didn't turn around. She kept her eyes fixed on the growing sphere of her new prison. Any last-minute communications from Earth? Nothing official. Though... Torres hesitated. "There was an encrypted burst transmission from your old unit. I haven't decoded it." "Don't bother. Whatever they're trying to say, it won't change anything." Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the viewport. A woman of 35 who looked older, with premature silver threading through her black hair and lines around her dark eyes that spoke of too many hard decisions. The charges against her had been simple enough to understand, even if they were complete fabrications. Unauthorized engagement with hostile forces, civilian casualties during the Battle of Proxima Station, violation of the Terran-Zephyrian peace accords. The evidence had been doctored, the witnesses coached, and the verdict predetermined. But Sarah knew the real reason she was here. She had refused to back down when Admiral Korath of the Zephyrian Empire demanded humanity surrender its mining rights in the Outer Rim. She had exposed his secret military buildup on the contested worlds. Most importantly, she had proven that humans could outfight, outthink, and outlast any alien species when their backs were against the wall. That had made her dangerous, not to humanity's enemies, but to the politicians who preferred appeasement to action. The transport shuddered as it entered Kepler 438b's thin atmosphere. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the surface rushing up to meet them. Endless gray plains broken by jagged mountain ranges and deep canyons that looked like wounds in the planet's flesh. There was a strange beauty to it, she supposed, the kind of harsh, unforgiving landscape that had shaped humanity since the species first looked up at the stars. "Landing in 5 minutes," Torres announced. "The supply drop contains enough food and water for 6 months, plus basic shelter materials. After that..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew there wouldn't be a rescue mission. Sarah finally turned from the viewport. "Captain, I want you to know that I don't blame you for this. Following orders is what keeps the fleet functioning." Torres met her eyes for the first time since leaving Earth. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, there are a lot of us who think this is wrong. What you did at Proxima, saving those colonists from the Zephyrian attack fleet, that was the right call. History will judge whether it was right or wrong. I just hope humanity survives long enough to write that history." The transport touched down with a grinding thud that echoed through the hull. Sarah gathered her single bag of personal possessions. They had been generous enough to let her keep a few mementos, some technical manuals, and her father's old engineering toolkit. Everything else had been confiscated as potential security risks. The cargo bay doors hissed open, revealing the stark landscape of her new home. The air was thin but breathable, thanks to the planet's artificial atmosphere generators that had been installed decades ago during a failed terraforming project. The temperature was cold enough to see her breath, and the wind carried the scent of dust and ozone. "Supply drop is over there." Torres pointed to a cluster of containers about 50 meters away. "The automated beacon will transmit your status to Galactic Command once a month. If you're still alive, that is." Sarah shouldered her bag and walked down the cargo ramp. Her boots crunched on the rocky surface, and she could feel the planet's slightly higher gravity pulling at her bones. Behind her, the transport's engines began to spin up for departure. She didn't look back. The supply containers were exactly what she had expected, Military grade but basic. Food rations, water purification tablets, a prefabricated shelter, some tools, and a communication device that could receive but not transmit. They wanted to keep an eye on her, but they didn't want her talking to anyone. As the transport disappeared into the gray sky, Sarah stood alone on the surface of Kepler 438b and took her first real look around. The landscape was harsh but not entirely barren. In the distance, she could see the skeletal remains of the old terraforming stations, massive structures that had once tried to transform this rock into something resembling a garden world. They had failed, but Sarah wasn't interested in gardens. She was interested in the infrastructure they had left behind. Over the next several days, she established a basic routine. Morning meant checking the shelter's systems and reviewing her supplies. Afternoon was for exploration, mapping the area around her landing site and cataloging anything useful she found. Evening was for planning and preparation. What she found during those explorations changed everything. The terraforming project hadn't just failed, it had been sabotaged. The fusion reactors that powered the atmosphere generators had been deliberately damaged, their control systems infected with a virus that slowly degraded their efficiency until the entire project collapsed. Sarah found the evidence in the abandoned control centers, hidden in corrupted data logs that most investigators would have dismissed as random errors. But Sarah Chen hadn't become the youngest fleet commander in human history by dismissing anomalies. She had gotten there by seeing patterns that others missed, by asking questions that made people uncomfortable, and by never accepting the official story when the evidence pointed elsewhere. The sabotage had been sophisticated, the work of someone who understood both human technology and the political implications of failure. Someone who had wanted the terraforming project to fail, who had wanted this planet to remain a barren rock suitable only for exile and death. Someone who had known even 20 years ago that they might need a place to dispose of inconvenient humans. On her 7th day of exile, Sarah made her first major discovery. Hidden in the deepest levels of the primary terraforming facility, she found a sealed chamber containing not just emergency supplies, but a complete manufacturing facility. Automated systems for producing everything from basic tools to advanced electronics, all powered by a fusion reactor that had been built to last centuries. The facility had been hidden even from the terraforming teams, built into the planet's infrastructure like a secret ace in the hole. The access codes were encoded in a pattern that only a fleet-trained engineer would recognize, the same pattern her father had taught her when she was 12 years old. Someone had been planning for this day for a very long time. Sarah spent the next 3 days learning to operate the hidden facility. The manufacturing systems were incredibly advanced, capable of producing anything she could design and program. The databanks contained not just technical specifications for standard equipment, but experimental designs that were decades ahead of anything in the official fleet archives. Weapons, ships, communication arrays, defensive systems that could turn a barren rock into an impregnable fortress. On her 10th day of exile, Sarah Chen began to understand that she hadn't been sent here to die. She had been sent here to disappear, to remove her as a factor in the coming war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. The politicians thought they could sacrifice one inconvenient commander to buy peace with their alien overlords. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. Standing in the hidden facility, surrounded by machines that hummed with barely contained power, Sarah began to smile for the first time since the court-martial. She had been banished to a barren rock, branded as a criminal, and left to die in obscurity. Instead, she had found exactly what she needed to remind the galaxy why humans were dangerous when cornered. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced species among the stars, but because they were the only ones crazy enough to look at impossible odds and see them as a challenge rather than a death sentence. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began her real work, The manufacturing facility could produce raw materials and basic components, but it would take careful planning and considerable time to build anything truly useful. She started small: better shelter, improved tools, enhanced communication equipment that could monitor galactic command transmissions without being detected. Each day brought new discoveries in the facility's vast databanks. Whoever had built this place had been preparing for war, not just the current tensions with the Zephyrians, but a larger conflict that would determine humanity's place in the galactic community. The hidden files contained intelligence reports, tactical analyses, and strategic plans that painted a picture of systematic alien manipulation of human politics. The Zephyrians weren't just expanding their territory. They were deliberately weakening human resolve, corrupting human leaders, and positioning themselves for a final assault that would reduce humanity to a client species. The peace accords that Sarah had supposedly violated were actually surrender documents, designed to hand over human space to alien control without firing a shot. She had been court-martialed not for her crimes, but for her competence. By the end of her first month on Kepler 438b, Sarah had established a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. The planet's position on the edge of human space gave her access to communication traffic from both human and alien sources. The advanced decryption systems in the hidden facility allowed her to crack even the most secure transmissions. What she learned confirmed her worst fears. The Zephyrian Empire was massing fleets at strategic points throughout human space, preparing for simultaneous strikes against Earth, the core colonies, and the major fleet bases. They had corrupted high-ranking officials in galactic command, feeding them false intelligence while preparing their own forces for victory. The attack would come within 6 months, timed to coincide with the annual peace celebration that commemorated the signing of the Accords. It would be a massacre. Sarah stood in the facility's main command center, watching the tactical displays that showed the true scope of the alien buildup. Ships, troops, weapons, and supplies flowing through space in patterns that the corrupted human leadership was too blind or too bought to recognize. In 6 months, humanity would be defenseless against an enemy that had been planning this moment for years, unless someone did something about it. Sarah Chen had always been good at doing something about impossible situations. That was why they had tried to remove her from the equation. But instead of neutralizing the threat she represented, they had given her exactly what she needed to become something much more dangerous than a fleet commander. They had made her a ghost in the machine, invisible to official oversight, but with access to resources they never knew existed. They had given her time to plan, motivation to act, and the perfect cover story. After all, who would suspect a dead woman on a barren rock of orchestrating a resistance movement? Looking at the evidence of alien treachery displayed on the screens around her, Sarah began to formulate a plan. It would be audacious, risky, and completely contrary to every rule of military engagement. It would require her to become something that the galaxy had never seen before, not just a human commander, but a symbol of everything that made humanity dangerous. She would need weapons, allies, and a way to strike back at an enemy that thought they had already won. Most importantly, she would need to remind both humans and aliens of a simple truth that too many had forgotten in the comfortable years of fake peace. Humanity had not clawed its way up from a gravity well, spread across the stars, and built an interstellar civilization by accepting defeat gracefully. They had done it by refusing to quit, no matter how bad the odds looked. Sarah Chen had been banished to a barren rock and left to die. Instead, she was about to become the most dangerous human in the galaxy. The planet Kepler 438b was about to become something that no one had expected, not a grave, but a forge where the future of human independence would be hammered into shape, and Sarah Chen would be the smith who wielded the hammer. 3 months into her exile, Sarah Chen stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time intelligence from across human space. The hidden facility beneath Kepler 438b had become the nerve center of something unprecedented, a one-woman intelligence operation that was tracking alien movements, corrupt human officials, and the systematic dismantling of humanity's defenses. The manufacturing systems had been working around the clock, producing everything from advanced sensors to combat drones. The planet's surface was now dotted with concealed installations that could monitor subspace communications, track ship movements, and coordinate defensive systems across multiple star systems. What had once been a barren rock was becoming a technological fortress. But Sarah's greatest achievement wasn't the hardware she was building, it was the network of allies she was recruiting. The first had been Captain Maria Santos of the merchant vessel Distant Thunder. Sarah had monitored Santos's ship as it passed through the system, noting the unusual modifications to its cargo hold and the subtle military precision of its crew movements. When she dug deeper into the ship's records, she discovered that Santos was running supplies to human colonies that had been cut off from official support, worlds that were being deliberately isolated to make them easier targets for Zephyrian conquest. Sarah's first communication with the outside world in 3 months had been a tight beam transmission to Santos's ship, encrypted with codes that only a fleet officer would recognize. The message was simple: Ghost 6 to Distant Thunder. Package delivery available. The response had come 12 hours later. Thunder to Ghost 6. What's your cargo manifest? Intelligence on alien fleet movements, proof of corruption in galactic command, and coordinates for supply drops that won't show up on official records. That's quite a manifest, Ghost 6. What's your asking price? Your silence? Your smuggling network? And your promise to pass my messages to people who still remember what fighting for humanity means. That conversation had been the beginning of what would become known as the Ghost Network, a collection of merchant captains, colonial militias, rogue fleet officers, and civilian volunteers who were willing to prepare for a war that officially wasn't coming. The second recruit had been Commander Jake Morrison, Sarah's former tactical officer, who had been reassigned to a backwater patrol station after testifying in her defense. Morrison commanded a squadron of outdated destroyers that were supposed to be guarding the shipping lanes near the Zephyrian border. Instead, he was using them to gather intelligence on alien fleet movements and quietly stockpile weapons and supplies. When Sarah made contact with Morrison, she didn't have to explain the situation. He had already figured out that something was wrong with the official intelligence reports, and he had been conducting his own investigation into the alien buildup. Her comprehensive data simply confirmed what he already suspected. "Jesus, Sarah," he had transmitted after reviewing her intelligence package. "They're not just planning an invasion. They're planning genocide. These fleet positions. If they hit us all at once, we won't have time to organize a defense." "That's the idea, Jake. The corrupted officials in Galactic Command are making sure our fleets are scattered and unprepared. When the attack comes, resistance will be minimal." "So what do we do about it? I've got 6 destroyers and a handful of support ships. You're supposed to be dead on some rock in the middle of nowhere." "We're not exactly in position to mount a conventional defense." "Who said anything about conventional?" That had been the start of what Sarah privately called the Spartan strategy. Instead of trying to match the aliens ship for ship in open battle, the Ghost Network would focus on precision strikes, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare. They would make the enemy's overwhelming numerical advantage meaningless by refusing to fight the kind of war the aliens expected. The third key recruit had been Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist who had been studying Zephyrian psychology and social structure for over a decade. Vasquez had been quietly excluded from official research projects after publishing papers that suggested Zephyrian peaceful expansion was actually a carefully orchestrated plan for species domination. Sarah had reached out to Vasquez through an encrypted academic network, posing as a graduate student researching alien military doctrines. The doctor's responses had revealed a brilliant mind that understood not just how the Zephyrians thought, but how they could be defeated. The key to understanding the Zephyrians is their absolute confidence in their own superiority, Vasquez had explained during one of their covert communications. They believe that humans are inherently inferior, individually weaker, less intelligent, and incapable of long-term strategic thinking. This belief is so fundamental to their worldview that it blinds them to human capabilities. How do we use that against them? By proving them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The Zephyrians expect humans to fight like Zephyrians, with massive fleets, formal battle lines, and hierarchical command structures. They've studied our official military doctrines for years, and they know exactly how to counter them. But they've never studied human irregular warfare because they don't believe humans are capable of it. Guerrilla tactics? More than that. Humans have something that no other known species possesses: the ability to think creatively under pressure and turn disadvantages into advantages. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy follows predictable patterns of behavior, even in crisis situations. Only humans are genuinely unpredictable. That conversation had shaped everything that followed. Sarah began designing a resistance strategy that would exploit human unpredictability while taking advantage of the aliens' arrogant assumptions. Instead of trying to save humanity through conventional military strength, she would save it by proving that humans were far more dangerous than anyone suspected. The fourth month brought the first test of the Ghost Network's capabilities. A Zephyrian merchant fleet had been detected moving through the Kepler system, officially carrying trade goods but actually conducting detailed reconnaissance of human defensive positions. The convoy included 2 heavy cruisers disguised as cargo vessels, plus a full complement of intelligence-gathering equipment. Traditional fleet doctrine would have been to either ignore the convoy or conduct a formal inspection that would reveal nothing useful. Instead, Sarah coordinated a different kind of response. Morrison's destroyers intercepted the convoy at the edge of the system, conducting what appeared to be a routine customs inspection. While his crews searched the cargo holds, they planted Sarah's surveillance devices throughout the alien ships. The Zephyrians never suspected that their reconnaissance mission was being turned against them. Meanwhile, Captain Santos and her network of merchant vessels conducted their own routine shipping runs through the area, using Sarah's intelligence to track and record every detail of the alien operation. By the time the convoy left human space, the Ghost Network knew everything about their equipment, their personnel, their communication protocols, and their true mission. But the real victory came 3 weeks later, when the intelligence gathered from that operation allowed Sarah to predict and thwart a Zephyrian attempt to infiltrate a human fleet base. The aliens had been planning to plant sabotage devices in the base's defense systems, but Sarah's early warning allowed Morrison's forces to set up a counter-operation. Instead of preventing the infiltration, they allowed it to proceed while monitoring every move the alien agents made. When the saboteurs thought they had successfully compromised the base's defenses, they were actually being fed false information that would cause their own attack plans to backfire spectacularly. The psychological impact of that operation extended far beyond its immediate tactical value. For the first time in years, human forces had outmaneuvered their alien opponents through superior intelligence and planning. Word of the success spread through unofficial channels, reaching human officers and officials who had begun to suspect that the official narrative of peaceful coexistence was a lie. More importantly, it proved to the Zephyrians that humanity was not as predictable as they had assumed. Their agents reported that human defensive capabilities were far more sophisticated than their intelligence had indicated, and their infiltration methods were apparently known and countered by an unknown human intelligence operation. Sarah monitored the alien communications with satisfaction as their confidence began to show the first small cracks. They were still planning their massive attack, but they were now questioning some of their basic assumptions about human military competence. The 5th month brought the greatest challenge yet, and the greatest opportunity. Dr. Vasquez's research had identified a critical weakness in the Zephyrian command structure. Like most rigidly hierarchical species, they were extremely vulnerable to what humans would call decapitation strikes. If their senior commanders were eliminated or isolated, their entire military machine would become paralyzed as subordinate officers waited for orders that would never come. But attacking Zephyrian command ships directly would be suicide for any conventional human force. The aliens maintained their fleet headquarters aboard massive fortress vessels that were protected by screens of escort ships and defensive installations. No human fleet could penetrate those defenses, even if they knew exactly where to strike. That was where Sarah's unconventional approach proved its value. Instead of trying to fight through the alien defenses, she would bypass them entirely. The plan she developed was so audacious that even Morrison initially questioned her sanity. Using intelligence gathered by the Ghost Network, Sarah had identified the location of the primary Zephyrian command vessel, a mobile fortress called the Eternal Dominance that served as both military headquarters and symbol of alien superiority. The ship was currently positioned in the Zeta Reticuli system, conducting final preparations for the invasion of human space. It was surrounded by an entire fleet and protected by every defensive measure the aliens could devise. It was, by any reasonable assessment, completely invulnerable to attack, which was exactly why Sarah planned to destroy it. The key was a piece of ancient human technology that had been forgotten by the modern fleet, compressed antimatter charges that had been developed during the early exploration period for asteroid mining. The charges were incredibly powerful, but difficult to use safely, which was why they had been replaced by more conventional explosives decades ago. But Sarah wasn't planning to use them conventionally. Working with the Hidden Facilities manufacturing systems, she had built a series of specialized drones that could carry compressed antimatter charges through space while remaining virtually undetectable to alien sensors. The drones were designed to look like space debris, chunks of rock and metal that would be ignored by any scanning system. The plan required precise timing and coordination across multiple star systems. Morrison's destroyers would create a diversion near the border, drawing alien attention away from the command fleet. Santos's merchant network would position the camouflaged drones along the Eternal Dominance's projected course. Dr. Vasquez would provide psychological analysis to predict how the alien commanders would respond to the attack. And Sarah would coordinate everything from her hidden facility on Kepler 438b, using the planet's strategic position and advanced communication arrays to maintain real-time contact with all elements of the operation. The attack began exactly 5 months and 3 weeks after Sarah's exile began. Morrison's forces engaged a Zephyrian patrol fleet near the disputed border, conducting hit-and-run attacks that appeared to be a desperate attempt to delay the coming invasion. The aliens responded exactly as predicted, moving additional forces to reinforce their border defenses. Meanwhile, the Eternal Dominance and its escort fleet maintained their position in Zeta Reticuli, continuing their invasion preparations with arrogant confidence. Their sensors detected nothing unusual as they passed through a seemingly empty region of space that contained several unremarkable chunks of metallic debris. Sarah watched the tactical display from her command center, tracking the movement of every ship and drone in real time. The alien command vessel was maintaining a steady course, completely unaware that it was flying through a carefully laid trap. "Ghost 6 to all stations," she transmitted to the network. "Spartan protocol is active. Execute on my mark." The compressed antimatter charges detonated simultaneously, creating a series of explosions that turned a cubic kilometer of space into a miniature supernova. The Eternal Dominance and 3 escort ships simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that their destruction couldn't be distinguished from a natural stellar phenomenon. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Zephyrian Empire had lost not just their primary command vessel, but their entire senior military leadership and the symbol of their invincibility. Across their fleets, subordinate commanders found themselves without orders, without guidance, and without the absolute confidence that had driven their expansion plans. More importantly, news of the attack spread through both human and alien space like wildfire. Humanity had struck back at their would-be conquerors with a precision and audacity that shocked everyone who heard the story. The message was clear. Humans were not helpless prey waiting to be conquered. They were predators who had been pretending to be sheep. Sarah stood in her command center, watching as the carefully constructed facade of alien superiority began to crumble across the galaxy. The Zephyrian invasion fleet was in chaos, their political leadership was in panic, and their puppet officials in human space were suddenly finding it much harder to justify their policies of appeasement. The barren rock of Kepler 438b now flew 2 banners that could be seen from space, the flag of Earth, and below it a new symbol that was already becoming legendary throughout human space. A simple design that showed a stylized human figure standing alone against a field of stars, with words that were being repeated in hushed conversations on every human world. Death before dishonor, victory before peace, humanity before all. But Sarah's greatest achievement wasn't the destruction of an alien command ship or the symbols of defiance that now marked her planet. It was the kill list that she had compiled over 6 months of intelligence gathering, a comprehensive catalog of every human who had betrayed their own species for alien gold, every official who had sold out humanity's future, and every collaborator who had helped prepare the ground for genocide. The list contained over 300 names, from low-level bureaucrats to senior fleet officers to members of the Galactic Council itself. Each entry included detailed evidence of treason, corruption, and collaboration with enemy forces. The list was comprehensive, meticulously documented, and absolutely damning. And in 72 hours, copies of that list would be transmitted to every human world, every fleet base, and every resistance cell in the galaxy. The war for humanity's future was about to begin in earnest. But now it would be fought on human terms, according to human rules, and with a clear understanding of exactly who the real enemies were. Sarah Chen had been banished to a barren rock to die in obscurity. Instead, she had become the ghost in the machine that would haunt humanity's enemies for generations to come. The girl who had been sent away to disappear had become the woman who would make sure that humanity never forgot how to fight for its freedom. Standing before the tactical displays that showed the chaos spreading through alien space, Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had tried to remove her from the equation by making her a non-person exiled to a dead world. Instead, they had given her exactly what she needed to become something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine, a martyr who wasn't dead yet. 6 months after her exile, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, watching as the last Zephyrian fleet in human space burned against the stars. The ship beneath her feet wasn't the massive dreadnought it appeared to be. It was actually a converted mining platform that had been rebuilt in the hidden shipyards of Kepler 438b, equipped with weapons that the aliens had never imagined humans could build. The battle had lasted 18 hours, but the outcome had been decided before the first shot was fired. The Zephyrian invasion force had expected to face scattered human defenders who would fight according to predictable doctrines. Instead, they had encountered something that their most paranoid strategists had never conceived, a fully coordinated human resistance that fought like no other species in the galaxy. The Ghost Network had grown beyond Sarah's wildest expectations. What had started as a handful of rogue officers and merchant captains had become a shadow fleet that operated throughout human space, striking at alien forces with precision that bordered on precognition. Every human world now had resistance cells that were in constant communication with Sarah's command center, sharing intelligence and coordinating operations across dozens of star systems. But the real victory hadn't been won in space. It had been won in the hearts and minds of humanity itself. The kill list that Sarah had compiled during her first months of exile had been released exactly as planned, transmitted simultaneously to every human world and fleet base in the galaxy. The evidence of widespread collaboration with alien forces had sparked a revolution that swept through human space like a cleansing fire. Within days of the list's publication, corrupt officials were being arrested by their own security forces. Fleet officers who had been sabotaging human defenses found themselves facing mutinous crews who had learned the truth about their commander's treachery. Politicians who had been advocating surrender discovered that their constituents were far more interested in fighting than in capitulating. The psychological impact had been devastating for the Zephyrian war effort. Their entire strategy had been based on the assumption that human resistance would be minimal, divided, and easy to suppress. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that had been unified by anger and motivated by the desire for revenge. Admiral Korath, the Zephyrian commander who had orchestrated the planned invasion, had made his final transmission 3 days ago. The message had been intercepted by the Ghost Network's communication arrays and broadcast throughout human space as a symbol of alien defeat. This is Admiral Korath of the Eternal Empire to all Zephyrian forces in human space. The invasion is cancelled. Repeat, the invasion is cancelled. All fleets are to withdraw immediately to pre-war positions. The humans have proven to be more resourceful than anticipated. The transmission had ended with something that no Zephyrian had ever broadcast before, an admission of defeat by a species that had never known failure. Sarah turned from the viewport and walked toward the Retribution's command center, passing crew members who nodded respectfully as she passed. Most of them were former merchants, miners, and colonial militiamen who had volunteered to serve aboard the ships of humanity's new fleet. They wore no formal uniforms and followed no traditional military protocol, but they fought with a dedication that impressed even veteran fleet officers. Commander Morrison met her at the entrance to the command center, his weathered face showing the strain of 6 months of constant warfare. "The last Zephyrian ship just jumped out of the system," he reported. "Long-range sensors show they're heading for the border at maximum speed. I don't think they'll be coming back anytime soon." Any word from the other fronts? Santos reports that the Arcturus system has been completely cleared of alien forces. Dr. Vasquez's psychological warfare campaign in the Centauri sector has convinced 3 Zephyrian commanders to surrender rather than face human boarding parties. And the homeworld defense fleets are reporting that no alien ships have been detected within 50 light-years of Earth. Sarah nodded, processing the reports with satisfaction. The war wasn't over. There were still alien forces throughout the galaxy. And the Zephyrian Empire would undoubtedly attempt some form of retaliation, but the immediate threat to human survival had been eliminated, and the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. "What's the status of our new shipyards?" she asked. "Production is ahead of schedule. The facilities on Kepler 438b are turning out new vessels faster than we can train crews for them. Dr. Vasquez estimates that we'll have numerical parity with the combined alien fleets within 2 years and technological superiority within 5. That was the most remarkable aspect of humanity's sudden military resurgence." The hidden facilities that Sarah had discovered on Kepler 438b had contained more than just manufacturing equipment. They had contained the accumulated knowledge of human scientific and engineering advancement that had been suppressed by corrupt officials for decades. The weapons and ships now being produced by human shipyards were generations ahead of anything the aliens possessed. Faster, more maneuverable, more heavily armed, and equipped with defensive systems that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. The technology had always existed, but it had been kept secret by officials who feared that military advancement would threaten the fragile peace with alien powers. Now that the peace had proven to be a lie, humanity was free to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The command center bustled with activity as officers and technicians monitored operations throughout human space. The banks of displays showed ship movements, communication intercepts, and status reports from resistance cells on dozens of worlds. It was a far cry from the lonely months Sarah had spent monitoring alien activities from her exile on a barren rock. Captain Santos approached from the communications station, carrying a data tablet with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "Commander Chen, we've just received a priority transmission from Earth. Galactic Command wants to negotiate." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Negotiate what?" "Your return to active duty, full reinstatement, promotion to Admiral, and command of the reformed Home Defense Fleet. They're also offering to officially recognize the Ghost Network as a legitimate military organization and provide it with full fleet support." "How generous of them! And what do they want in return?" "They want you to stand down the resistance operations and integrate your forces into the regular fleet structure. They're concerned that continued irregular warfare might provoke retaliation from other alien species." Sarah looked around the command center, taking in the faces of the men and women who had followed her into battle against impossible odds. These people had risked everything to fight for humanity's freedom when the official government had been ready to surrender. They had proven that humans could outfight any alien species in the galaxy when they were properly led and motivated. Now the politicians wanted to put them back into the same corrupt system that had nearly led to humanity's destruction. "Send a reply to Galactic Command," she said finally. "Tell them that Commander Sarah Chen died on Kepler 438b 6 months ago, as officially recorded. The Ghost Network answers to Admiral Chen now, and Admiral Chen doesn't negotiate with collaborators." Santos grinned. "And if they ask what the Ghost Network's intentions are, tell them we're going to continue doing what we've been doing, protecting humanity from its enemies, both alien and domestic. We're going to build a fleet that can defend human space against any threat, and we're going to make sure that humanity never again finds itself at the mercy of species that see us as inferior." The message was transmitted within hours, and the response from Earth was predictably outraged. Galactic Command declared the Ghost Network to be a rogue military organization operating outside legal authority. They demanded that all human worlds cease cooperation with Admiral Chen's forces and threatened to use the regular fleet to restore order. The threats might have been effective 6 months earlier, when humanity was still divided and demoralized. But now they fell on deaf ears. The colonial worlds that had been abandoned by the official government weren't about to turn their backs on the forces that had saved them. The fleet officers who had learned the truth about their corrupt commanders weren't going to return to the old system of appeasement and betrayal. Most importantly, the citizens of human space had seen what their species could accomplish when it fought for survival instead of acceptance. They weren't interested in returning to a galaxy where humans were considered second-class citizens. Within weeks, the political situation had resolved itself. The corrupt officials who hadn't already been arrested found themselves facing populations that no longer trusted or supported them. Elections were held on dozens of worlds, resulting in new governments that formally recognized Admiral Chen's authority and pledged support for the Ghost Network. The regular fleet faced a choice: remain loyal to a government that had lost the support of its people, or join the resistance movement that had actually defended humanity when it mattered. Most chose to join the Ghost Network, bringing their ships and crews over to Admiral Chen's command. Earth itself held out the longest, but even the homeworld government eventually had to acknowledge reality. When Admiral Chen's fleet arrived in the solar system 6 months later, they came not as conquerors but as liberators. The remaining corrupt officials were arrested, new elections were held, and humanity's capital world joined the growing confederation of free human worlds. Standing on the bridge of her flagship as it entered Earth orbit, Sarah Chen reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a disgraced commander exiled to a barren rock to die in obscurity. Now she was the leader of a military force that had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. But her greatest achievement wasn't military. It was proving to humanity and to the galaxy that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. Not because they were inherently violent or aggressive, but because they possessed something that no other species could match: the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome any obstacle through sheer determination and creative thinking, the willingness to fight hopeless battles and find ways to win them, the refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. Those qualities had made humans the most feared species in the galaxy almost overnight. Alien empires that had been planning to carve up human space were now reconsidering their ambitions. Species that had viewed humans as weak and primitive were suddenly treating them as equals or even superiors. The Zephyrian Empire had requested formal peace negotiations within a month of their defeat, offering territorial concessions and trade agreements that would have been unthinkable before the war. Other alien powers were sending diplomatic missions to Earth, eager to establish friendly relations with the species that had proven it could destroy entire fleets with tactics that no one else understood. Sarah stood at the viewport of her flagship, looking down at the blue marble of humanity's birth world. The planet looked exactly as she remembered it from her youth: beautiful, peaceful, and deceptively vulnerable. But appearances could be deceiving. Earth was now the capital of a confederation that could field fleets capable of challenging any alien empire in the galaxy. The banner that flew from her flagship bore the same symbol that had marked her exile on Kepler 438b, a human figure standing alone against the stars with words that had become the motto of the new human confederation: death before dishonor, victory before peace, humanity before all. Below that banner flew another flag, one that showed the outline of a barren planet against a field of stars, with a simple inscription that told the story of how everything had changed: Kepler 438b, where the impossible became inevitable. The planet that had been chosen as her grave had instead become the birthplace of humanity's renaissance. The barren rock where she was supposed to die in obscurity had become the symbol of human defiance and the launching point for humanity's rise to galactic prominence. Sarah Chen had been banished to that world as a broken commander whose career was over. She had returned to Earth as Admiral Chen, leader of the most powerful military force in human history and architect of her species' transformation from potential victims to undisputed predators. The kill list she had compiled during her exile was now a historical document, displayed in the Museum of Human Freedom on Earth as a reminder of how close humanity had come to extinction. The names on that list served as a warning to future generations about the price of collaboration with humanity's enemies. But more importantly, they served as proof of something that aliens throughout the galaxy were only beginning to understand. Humans were not just another species struggling for survival among the stars. They were something unique and dangerous, a species that turned exile into opportunity, defeat into victory, and isolation into strength. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed so distant or hostile. Somewhere in that vast darkness, alien empires were learning to fear the name of humanity, Somewhere among those points of light, other species were discovering that the galaxy had a new apex predator. And it all began on a barren rock where a woman who was supposed to die had instead learned how to make her enemies wish they had never been born. The transformation was complete. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as supplicants begging for acceptance, but as conquerors who demanded respect. The species that had once been dismissed as primitive and weak was now the standard by which military excellence was measured throughout the galaxy. All because someone had made the mistake of giving Sarah Chen exactly what she needed: time, motivation, and a place to work without interference. The galaxy would remember that mistake for a very long time.